2,000 lives, gone in less than 48 hours with no trials, no last words, just names crossed off a list, one after another. The prisoners were let out in silence, their chains scraping across concrete floors, and within minutes, gunfire. Then the next man, the next woman, the next group. It didn't stop until thousands had fallen. And here's the part that chills me most. For decades, hardly anyone outside the Soviet Union even knew it had happened. This wasn't war. No charging armies, no final great stands. They were women and men, political prisoners, marched out in small groups, shot in the back of the head, treated like garbage. It was a war of quiet, not death in days, but minutes. And why was the Soviet state so cruel? And why did all this horror take place virtually out of sight of the public? The late 1930s and early 1940s, Soviet Union was a paranoid state. Joseph Stalin's Great Purge had already ravaged the nation, dumping waves of suspected enemies of the people into jail and camps. Anyone was suspect: writers, clergymen, factory workers, officers, even loyal communists. Suspicion as a tool, denunciations as a means of survival. But by 1940, when full-scale war engulfed Europe, the Soviet leadership faced a new crisis. The prisons were full, so full that there was no room for additional arrests, and among the criminals were thousands of Ukrainians, Poles, and Baltic citizens caught up in the Soviet takeovers. To Moscow, they were not merely ordinary thugs. They were potential enemies, people whose allegiance was elsewhere from the Soviet state. The response, starkly literal, came from the apex of the power hierarchy. The NKVD, the secret police, were directly ordered: liquidate the prisoners. Not deport, not exile. Kill. The actual killing, more famously associated with locations like Katyn and Bykivnia, was achieved in a nightmarishly systematic fashion. The operation was savage in its effectiveness. They were rousted from bed in the middle of the night, their names run against lists drawn up in Moscow. They were dragged, chained, or under threat of a rifle butt to waiting cars. Many had no idea where they were going. They were told that they were being transferred, or discharged, or sent to the camps. Rather, they were taken to secluded sites of execution, most often forests selected on the basis of their inaccessibility. There, NKVD soldiers worked in relays. Prisoners were made to kneel, a shot in the back of the head, rapid, effective, anonymous. The corpse was thrown to one side, slumped into a pit, buried beneath a shroud of lime. And another prisoner. And another. In the course of fewer than 2 days, in this way, more than 2,000 were killed. Dozens received treatment at some locations at once. Others functioned like conveyor belt slaughterhouses. The scale is just unimaginably enormous, 40 people on average being slain every hour for an entire 2-day period. And of all the terrible pieces, maybe most chilling isn't the violence itself, it's what followed the quiet. Families weren't informed. Technically, dozens of victims were given 10 years without the right of correspondence. A Cold War Sovietism, for they'd never be heard from again. Family members waited decades expecting letters that never came, clinging to false hope. Even the executioners were swept up in secrecy. The murders were committed by NKVD men with vodka to hand, some of whom were numb, others becoming callous routine. They were not to be allowed to speak of what they had done. In Stalin's regime, silence was as deadly as a bullet. The massacre was not unique. It was but one facet of a broader Soviet policy of mass murder. Systematic purges aimed at the death, not only of criminals, but also groups of people viewed as disloyal. Woods on the Ukraine, Belarus, and Baltic borders were converted into graveyards. Hundreds of thousands of people disappeared in this way, their fate hidden for decades to follow, estimates suggest. And still, With all the size, the world was basically in the dark. The Soviet government, by iron discipline, governed and dictated the narrative. Files were shut, relatives were not informed, strangers were excluded. It wasn't until the fall of the USSR in 1991 that most of the records were flung open and the story started to reveal itself. What is it to think about a massacre of 2,000 persons killed in 48 hours? It is one thing on the one hand, and another on the other. It is the atrocities of a state that has reduced killing to an administrative process. It is also to face the human costs, the mothers and fathers, the teachers and physicians, and the kids rounded up under the cover of night, leaving only silence behind. Imagine the scale for a moment. If you were really in that forest during those 2 days, you'd be listening to one shot per 90 seconds, hour after hour, until your head would not be able to handle any more the brutality. And all for the purpose of security and loyalty. And there is also a lesson in the tragedy. If a government decides that groups of men are enemies just because they are, or what they hold to be true, then mankind as a whole is disposable. Stalin's administration was not different. Political power has never failed to teach us throughout history how it masks mass murder as something that is a must. Now the forests where these massacres took place remain quiet. Memorialize some of the sites. Some of the graves are unmarked, their dead unknown. To view today is to feel the crushing weight of presence, the quiet that once hid 1,000 lives cut short in an instant. So the question is still there. How does a society arrive at tolerating the killing of 2,000 people in 48 hours as a form of bureaucratic paperwork? And what is our position now in remembering them? History whispers its answer. Silence is complicity. Forgetting is dangerous. To recall these massacres is to deny their killers the forgetting that they wanted to impose on them. If this story shocked you, it should. Because it reminds us how life gets so fragile when power goes unchecked. These victims don't get to have a voice of their own, but we do. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy hearing stories like this, one that sweeps the cobwebs away from dusty history, then do please think about supporting this channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing with others who believe the past has something to say today. Your support keeps this history alive,